What's going on, everyone? Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with ScoopDuck on 3, coming to you on Wednesday, December 11th, 2024. Transfer portal season is in full effect. The Oregon Ducks took the Big Ten by storm in year one. All of that and more. We got plenty to chat about around the world of Oregon football today. And joining me, as always, is Justin Hopkins. J-Hop, how we doing?
So far, so good. Just tracking the transfer portal activity like everybody else. The second recruiting season, if you will, and getting really excited to see this Tennessee Ohio State game. See who Oregon plays in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, that game feels like it's kind of ages away with how quickly the season's been moving. But so we got a little under 3 weeks until that game kicks off in Pasadena, and I plan to be there to cover that one for our readers at ScoopDuck. So there's a lot of excitement right now. We're going to talk some transfer portal, of course, on this episode, but a couple other items that we wanted to get to off the top here right away, Justin. Oregon quarterback Dillon Gabriel was named one of 4 finalists for the Heisman Trophy, with the other 3 being Ashton Jeanty, the running back from Boise State, Travis Hunter, the cornerback wide receiver from Colorado, and Cam Ward, the Miami Hurricanes quarterback. So this one kind of felt like it was coming, but you can never be too sure with the way college football goes these days and who the media is favoring and who they're maybe not talking about enough. But now that it's official, Gabriel's going to be heading to New York, and that's back-to-back years for Oregon with a Heisman quarterback, a Heisman finalist at quarterback.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of felt like for a while that those first 3, those other 3 that you mentioned are on the top of everybody's Heisman list, and Gabriel's kind of consistently sitting at 4th. So obviously with the finalists, with there being 4, I'm just glad to see that was kind of verified and that Gabriel was able to make it. I think he's going to get kind of hosed. I honestly think he's a better player than he's getting credit for. Obviously, you lead a 13-0 team, and the season he's had, and the way he's distributed the ball, he's probably going to finish 3rd or 4th in the voting, I would assume, or I'm guessing. I think he should be. I think he should be 1st or 2nd. I mean, the best player on the best team, typically wins the award. For me, Ashton Jeanty would be number 2. Whether you have Gabriel at 1 or 2, I think Ashton Jeanty is the other guy that should have the best odds of winning it. I know Travis Hunter has done some special things, but I don't know, 9-3 and it just doesn't scream to me. And Cam Ward, again, good player on a good team, but Dillon Gabriel's a great player on a great team. That to me is who the Heisman should go to. Although you could make an argument for Jeanty in my mind.
And Oregon fans obviously know Jeanty very well from that early season matchup, and that win has just continued to age like fine wine for Oregon. Not that they needed a resume boost; they got the number 1 overall seed in the college football playoff, but as we know, that isn't necessarily the most favorable path. It's not a favorable path to a national championship for the Ducks, but Gabriel's played a huge role in Oregon's success this season, as you would expect with a quarterback. But I think if you just compare how things were looking in the first couple of weeks, Justin, to where they're at now, it's night and day difference. It's like, hey, there's a great quarterback here, but this offense doesn't really look like we thought that it was going to. And I think part of that goes to the offensive line and kind of some of the bumps in the road that they had earlier this year. But they are humming like a well-oiled machine now. And Dillon Gabriel has played some phenomenal football. I love his pocket presence, his awareness, his feel for pressure has just been really, really key in these past couple of weeks for Oregon, and he's just come up with some huge plays when they've needed it most. So not a huge surprise to see him named a finalist, but certainly a great development if you're an Oregon fan.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're Oregon, you could have, gone away from the run even more and padded his stats if you wanted to try and make a better case for him. But I think Oregon was more interested in winning football games and ran their offense as they should. So, to me, you look at Colorado and you look at Shedeur Sanders. What they had like 500 rush yards on the season, something like that. It was really low production. So clearly they were a throw happy offense. Shedeur Sanders is going to have big stats, which means Travis Hunter is going to have big stats on offense as well. Kudos to them. Not my favorite team, but still kudos to them. Again, I just think, what Dillon Gabriel's done, he's at moments been the guy on the team that's either sparked the team or made the big play or whatever. but a lot of his job is simply getting the ball out to his playmakers, and there's nothing wrong with that. He's got good weapons around him, and that's what has made Oregon's offense so deadly, is that it's pick your poison: the run game, the pass game, the short game, long game, tight end, Eastu, Tez Johnson. Like, pick your poison. I mean, there's a lot of weapons on Oregon's offense, and that's what makes it dangerous.
So we'll see if Gabriel ultimately ends up winning the Heisman. I think we are kind of in agreement here that it's not the most likely outcome. But hey, he already won the Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year award from, I believe, from the AP. So he's getting some recognition there, and he's also a finalist for the Campbell Award, I believe. So he's doing everything that he needs to do, that Oregon needs to do, to put themselves in a great spot. And I think he'll be the first one to tell you that he doesn't care too much about that individual award. They're going for something bigger. Staying on the topic of awards, J-Hop, let's talk about one of Eugene's own. Bryce Betcher wins the Burlsworth Trophy for the top player that began his career as a walk-on. And his story just keeps getting better week by week, it feels like. Walking onto the baseball team as well. Everyone knows about that. The fact that he's from Eugene, I think, makes it just a little bit sweeter for Duck fans. But he's been one of the best developments, one of the biggest surprises around Oregon football the last couple seasons, because he's developed into just a tremendous force at linebacker. And he's a guy whose energy just trickles down throughout the rest of that defense.
Well, I mean, this is 100% amplified because it is a kid from Eugene, grew up in Eugene, played both sports, obviously walked on, really like, hey, I'll just give football a shot. Why not? I'm here for baseball, but I'll give football a shot. And I mean, let's just say this: 2 years ago, if you said, hey, year and a half, whatever, if you'd said, hey, Bryce Betcher is going to be starting over Justin Jacobs, like, everybody would have put you in a straitjacket. And that's where we're at. Like, the dude deserves to be out there. He's not a liability in any form of the word. He's a playmaker, and just, you could tell the guy works his ass off. So just, really fun to see that story come, and excellent to see that he was, rewarded with some. That's a great award. I mean, because you talk about these practice squad guys and these walk-on guys and the lack of love they get, and those guys are out there at practice every day, just like the starters, trying to make the team better, trying to make the roster, trying to make themselves better. And it's basically, it's thankless work. And, it's you're doing it because you love it. So it's good to see those guys getting recognized and getting, awards and stuff like that, because they 100% deserve it. And, Bryce Betcher, I mean, there's no doubt he deserved to win that award. I mean, there were some other great candidates there, but you're talking about a really good linebacker on one of the best defenses in the country. So great story. I absolutely love it.
The other thing that I would add here, Justin, that is maybe a little bit under the radar, but I'm always looking for some of the recruiting impacts or recruiting angles of it. I think this is a great achievement for Bryce, but also Oregon, because it shows that you can come to Eugene as a walk-on, and if you put in the work and have the results on the practice field or the real field, playing on game days, you're going to be rewarded and have a role on the team. So I think that's just kind of a little side note that came to mind for me, because we know that walk-ons are a big part of the picture, and they don't necessarily get the credit that they deserve or the praise that they deserve. And Betcher's the last guy, I think, that would ask you for any of that. But I think that that's cool, just to show that, hey, you can come to Oregon. Maybe it's not the most traditional way, but you'll have a chance to make some noise. And if you take full advantage of it, there's an example of how it can pay off for you.
Yeah, huge development opportunity. And again, that's where we're at in Dan Lanning's career, is kind of, people knew he was a pretty strong recruiter, obviously was an unproven coach, kind of put that to bed. Now the next is, hey, showing that you put guys in the NFL. Bryce Betcher has a chance to go to the NFL, obviously drafted by MLB, by the Houston Astros, I believe. And, so we know he's a baseball player, but, it's a guy that could jump on some NFL draft boards if he's not careful. And to look at that kind of production, that's going to put to rest some concerns about development, and is also a big boost for Coach B. Mike, linebacker coach, to say, hey, look at what we did with this guy. And, I think another feather in the cap there is going to be what Jeff Bassett does. I think you'll see him be, some sort of a mid-round NFL draft guy. So again, Bassett was like a 4-star, but kind of barely a 4-star coming out of high school. Wasn't
a safety.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't a top, 150 player or anything like that. Just a solid player. And he's going to, enter the mid rounds of the NFL draft. So those are all good things. And just the story itself with Bryce Betcher being a Eugene kid is a phenomenal story.
Let's keep it rolling, Justin, and talk about the transfer portal, because the transfer portal is open. You're getting some drama, you're getting some happiness, and some, not sour grapes from some people, with a lot of these guys across the country hitting the portal. So we're going to get into that now and talk about some of Oregon's needs. Maybe just to start things off, we have two guys that have announced their intention to enter the transfer portal, of course, with both of them being from the true freshman class 2024 guys. That's offensive lineman Jaquan McCroy, Shaq McCroy from Alabama, and edge outside linebacker Jackson Jones from the state of Arizona. So let's just kind of throw that out there and let's wade into the waters of the transfer portal.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be some movement away from Oregon. There's going to be some guys that leave the program. It's a natural thing. The key is, if you're Oregon, you don't lose your starters, you don't lose your key production guys, you don't lose your high upside guys that are freshmen. Your top 10 signees or whatever they might be in any given class. Typically, that's what you're wanting to keep, and Dan Lanning does that as good as anybody. So this isn't where we say these guys suck, they were moving on. It is what it is. I think the transfer portal as a whole, not as it relates to just these two guys or Oregon, has become the they're chasing playing time, right? That's what a lot of these kids are doing. Some of them are chasing a bag. Some of them are going to get some NIL for their decision to enter the portal. That's going to be kind of reserved for like this small window of kids. So in the case of Jackson Jones and Shaq, they're obviously, my guess is we'll see Shaq end up somewhere much closer to his home in the Southeast there. That would be my guess as to what happens in his recruitment. Don't know who that'll be, but I mean, again, I think you'll see him a little bit closer to home this time around. And Jackson Jones, I think you're looking at a guy that, I mean, just quite frankly, as a true freshman, came in as a little bit of a project, buried on the depth chart, is going to go somewhere else and look to, maybe be closer to the ones on that depth chart wherever he ends up. I would guess that both of these moves end up being, moves that go down a little bit. I doubt they're going to leave Oregon and sign with Texas and Ohio State or Alabama or Georgia, if you catch my drift. Mm-hmm. Again, this isn't sour grapes. I'm not crapping on these kids. They're making the decisions they think are best for their careers. And, of course, we wish them well, but that's my guess as to what happens with both of these young men.
And that's also, I think, you're not saying anything bad about them. I think that's also just the reality of the matter for a lot of these guys that enter the transfer portal. Is your options are kind of limited because you're so young, and if you don't have tape, like that's what you need to ultimately kind of make your case to all of these other schools. But definitely echo with what you're saying, wishing those guys the best. We do have some early names that Oregon has grabbed some traction with in the transfer portal as Dan Lanning and the Ducks reload their roster for the 2025 season, while Justin, the 2024 season is still ongoing and they're preparing for the college football playoff, which is just a wild thing to say, but here we are.
Imagine the NFL opening up free agency the week of right before NFL playoffs, because that's essentially what's happening right now. Like, NFL free agency is happening the week before playoffs, and these guys are available to go play on other teams the week. Obviously, they can't come to Oregon and play for the playoffs. You get my point. But that's the madness that we're at right now.
Yeah, that's where we're at. And then you and I just finished covering Oregon's 2025 recruiting class a week ago today, which feels like ages ago. But Dan Lane and the Ducks doing some special things there. Let's hop into some of these names, Justin, that we're tracking here for Oregon in the transfer portal. Starting off with a big one, a guy who's been in a lot of headlines, and that is former USC defensive lineman Bear Alexander. He talked to Hayes Fawcett and said that he has 3 programs that are standing out in his transfer portal recruitment, that those 3 being Oregon, Penn State, and how about this, SMU. So those are kind of the 3 programs that Bear Alexander looks like he's focusing on right now. There's been some reporting out there that said he's going to be here out in Eugene for a visit in the coming weeks. I think it's next weekend. He's supposed to make his way out to Oregon. So for a team that needs some defensive line reinforcements, Jamari Caldwell is going to be exhausting his eligibility. Derek Harmon could come back, but I don't think many are expecting that with the crazy year he's having. You need some help at the defensive line spot on the interior, and Bear Alexander is looking for a new home. So what do you make of this development, Justin?
One of the more wild and interesting, we'll just call it recruitments, but dating back to his high school days, changing high schools multiple times, obviously is now looking for his third home in college. Started at Georgia, was at USC, now is going to end up at Oregon, Penn State, or SMU, we assume. And, I will say this. I mean, there is absolutely no denying that there is a tremendous football player there. Like if this kid very much like Jordan Burch, right? If he puts it all together and really invests the time into his body and really gets in the right culture and buys in, there's no doubt this guy has a shot, to be in the NFL and be a good NFL, draft pick. So if you're Oregon, like if I was Dan Lanning, if I was Marshall Malco, obviously they're not dumb. They're not going to enter this and just say, well, let's just throw all the money we have at him and sign him and we'll figure it out. They're obviously not entering that this way. We know by now to trust what these guys are doing. So all that aside, I'm sure the hard conversations have already been had with Bear, between Oregon and Bear, and said, hey, look, we're interested. I think you're a great player, but you're going to have to show up. You're going to have to work and you're going to have to buy in. And, we'll make you a fair market value offer through NIL, but we're not going to just drop a bag to make sure we get you. If you want to commit to that, we can make you better. And if you don't, best of luck to you. I'm sure that I have no doubt in my mind that conversation's been had. So really, ultimately, it's going to be up to Bear Alexander. And if he decides he is ready to make that investment in himself. And so intriguing one for sure. But again, I have zero doubt that Oregon hasn't laid out the groundwork for how this would work if he shows up to Oregon.
Yeah, I think that's super, super, clear. And I think that's what you would expect this Oregon staff to do with just how they've been able to operate and the hit rate that they've had in the transfer portal. They bring in guys that play for them. And they've got as strong of a culture as you'll find in college football. And I think certainly among the three finalists, they have the best situation for a guy like Bear Alexander to come into. And he's surrounded with other talent, other pieces on the defensive line as well. So I think it was a little bit of a surprise to see Oregon linked to him, although at least to most people, I did get a little bit of buzz about this a couple of weeks ago that he was going to be one to watch of the USC departures. So I think that Oregon's got a great shot here, but as you kind of mentioned, Justin, they got to navigate it their way and make sure that they're up front in this recruitment. So he would certainly be another fantastic addition if the Ducks are able to get it done. And I think that you have to have some confidence if you're an Oregon fan for them to ultimately get it done, given how they've utilized the portal and the results that they've been able to now show these guys after bringing them in.
Yeah, and this is ultimately this is a perfect example of what you and I were talking about a few minutes ago. Like if you look at the departures from USC so far in the transfer portal, that is what you don't want. I mean, you don't want Bear Alexander and Deuce Robinson and Quentin Joyner jumping in the transfer portal. Those are guys that you need playing for you. Miller Moss is another one that comes to mind. So again, you're looking at two different schools, Oregon and USC, and how it relates to the transfer portal. I'm certain there will be other departures from Oregon moving forward as the portal stays open until the 28th. I don't doubt that, but I think Oregon's going to probably be in a much better situation about retaining its guys than obviously USC, UCLA, LSU, Bama. Man, those schools are getting
A&M.
A&M, man, they're getting hammered right now. Like I'm really glad I'm not covering any of those schools because I mean the departures are somewhat staggering there. But again, credit to Dan Lanning and Marshall Malco and those guys for holding it together. Oops.
Absolutely. Well, we know that they know what they're doing at this point. Let's just put it that way. Let's talk about another big name that we're tracking here for Oregon in the transfer portal, and that is former Purdue safety Dylan Thieneman. He's 6 foot, 207 pounds, originally from the state of Indiana, and he wasted no time really making himself felt. He won numerous awards as one of the top freshmen in all of college football upon arriving in West Lafayette. And we know that Oregon needs some safety help, Justin, because they're going to lose Kobe Savage, Tyshim Johnson, Brandon Johnson. all of their top contributors basically at safety following the end of the 2024 season. So I guess as we talk a little bit more about Thieneman here, I also wanted to kind of pick your brain a little bit about how Oregon has, in my opinion, kind of relied a bit too much on the transfer portal for their starting safeties in recent years. You got to also remember they brought in Peyton Woodyard from a year ago after he quote unquote transferred from Alabama. I say quote unquote because he just got there and then Saban retired. So let's just kind of dive into it with that.
Yeah. First off, I'll start with the Thieneman directly. I mean, this is it. This is the guy, right? I mean, if you're looking for safety help, this is a guy that does have multiple years available to him if that's what he decides that he wants to do. Absolute stud. There's no doubt in my mind that Barry Odom, now the head coach at Purdue, is doing everything he can to hold on to this guy, but that's probably going to be really tough at this point. Odom, of course, taking the job after leading UNLV and the job he did there, which was tremendous. Right now we know that it seems like it's Oregon and Ohio State here for this guy. I would wager and I would guess, because how important this position is, Oregon will invest a lot of resources here as much as they can to try to make this one happen. Again, everything has a value. So if Ohio State says, hey, we're just going to throw silly money at him, certainly he may end up there. The Buckeyes are legit in this. So that's the way this one will probably go down. You can make an argument for both schools. Like, obviously, Oregon beat Ohio State this year. I recognize that. But, I mean, Ohio State's a blue blood. They do a great job.
Close to home.
Yeah, I could only imagine putting this guy next to Caleb Downs, how crazy that would be. I mean, that's crazy. But Oregon needs him. Oregon will vest here. And I believe that, you're on the right track. It's a little bit concerning that safety specifically has been such a, quote unquote safety valve. The transfer portal has been a safety valve for Oregon. And that trend needs to stop. You're going to see, Savage obviously through the portal is going to be done. Tysheem Johnson through the portal will be done this year. Brandon Johnson will be done this year. So I think as long as you see Woodyard develop and, however you want to classify Kingston Lopa and Aaron Flowers, and then you're going to look at like Trey McNutt and Dorian Brew, who might be a nickel, those guys that they brought in this year. Hopefully this year in the transfer portal will be the last year that they heavily rely on safety. I think they're going to have to get at least 2 safeties through the portal this year. I think they're going to have to. But I think with that young talent behind him, if they can recruit 2026 well at the safety position, you probably start to look at, hey, look, we're kind of down to where we either don't need a guy or we only need one to kind of supplement and probably be okay there, because I think we're seeing Dan Lanning working to that. But I think people expected, because he signed one really good recruiting class in 2024, that was immediately done. It's like, nah. I mean, even Alabama's still using the transfer portal. Georgia's using the transfer portal. Ohio State is. I mean, and those guys recruit really well every year. So you're going to supplement. I think we're going to see Dan Lanning probably take fewer transfer portal guys than he's taken at Oregon so far. But I think it's going to be some legit dudes like Thieneman and Bear Alexander and some of the other top names we see in the portal.
Yeah, and that's the thing here, is you have to manage it really diligently, not overextend yourself. But I think we've seen Oregon, they prioritize guys or positions, I should say, and then they do everything they can to get someone like that. You look back to last cycle, Justin, right? And Justin and Oregon got Derek Harmon not at the 11th hour, but relatively late. And you remember how chaotic of a journey that was. He was leaving Michigan State. He was staying at Michigan State. Then he decided to leave Michigan State and ultimately ended up at Oregon. And it's just been an absolute game wrecker for Oregon this year. So they're going to make sure that they prioritize the really, really big time guys. And I think that Thieneman could certainly find himself right there in the thick of that conversation.
Yeah, this is an elite guy. I think Bear Alexander is going to be one of the most coveted guys, but they're not careless, right? There's some really good receivers that have gone in the transfer portal. Oregon's not really linked to any of them. I mean, I think that they feel pretty good about Corian Moore. I'm not saying they won't, entertain a wide receiver through the transfer portal, but it certainly doesn't seem to be as much of a need as safety, offensive tackle, defensive line, some of the other positions that we're seeing Oregon prioritize. And I don't know if we're going to talk about the transfer portal, but I want to make sure that I mention this. Just remember this, and to your point with Derek Harmon too, this is just the first window. This is the winter window. There's also a spring window in April, which is when Derek Harmon came last year. So there probably won't be as many guys of a high caliber that jump into the transfer portal in April, but there still could be at least a few that Oregon might say, hey, look, we missed on Thieneman. We only got one safety. We've gone through spring ball or half a spring ball. We need one more. Let's find a guy. So even if they don't fulfill a position here, they can still work on it again in the spring if they need to.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it's all about just managing the ebbs and flows and getting guys out for visits or setting that up. There's so many moving pieces with the transfer portal, so we're gonna do our best to keep an eye on that. Before we get any further, I want to give a quick shout out to Ranchito Grill in Springfield, one of the sponsors here on the Ducks Dish podcast. Not sure what your plans are for dinner tonight, but head on over to Ranchito at 1537 Mohawk Boulevard. Try out their homemade tortillas. They got great food, a great environment, and they will take care of you. Say what's up to my guy Ruben and let him know that Max Torres sent you. So a couple more things to hit on here, Justin, before we get out of today's episode. We've kind of gotten into a bit of the needs for Oregon. I also want to talk about a new offer that we saw the Ducks extend over the last day or so. So I think for needs, we've talked even before the season, before the recruiting signing day, we talked about how they're probably going to need some help at offensive line. We don't know if Josh Connerly Jr. is going to be coming back. He's been on a tear to end the year. We know Johnny Cornelius is going to be heading on to the NFL. Marcus Harper, another guy they're going to lose. So offensive line is one of those needs. We've clearly talked about safety, but I think one of those other positions could potentially be linebacker or running back, needing a guy or two at one of those spots, depending on how this roster shakes out.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few spots that they're going to prioritize. I know we talked about a couple, and I think that's the key. You're looking at now 2 top 5 recruiting classes back-to-back 2024 and now 2025. As you wrote and we talked about, at least it looks like around at least 15 of those 2025 signees are getting to Oregon in some capacity early, whether that means they're arriving as soon as today or this weekend, which is the case for a couple. But obviously arriving where they can do some winter workouts and be ready to go for spring ball. You'll have some that'll arrive in January. You'll have some that'll arrive in March. It's just kind of how it goes. Stacking those 2 classes back to back like that means Oregon, can be a little more selective in the transfer portal and will lean on less help. The transfer portal can be used for 2 things. It can be used to overhaul a roster like we saw Kenny Dillingham do at ASU. His use of the transfer portal was obviously, masterful. You could see what he did with that team and turn it around and brought guys in with experience and made the Sun Devils competitive immediately. You can use it like Dane Lanning in Oregon does, which is, hey, we're gonna kind of pick and choose here and just take and elevate our roster. We're gonna take a good roster and elevate it with, either depth pieces or proven immediate starters that are just going to elevate whichever room they're in. So, I think that's what you're seeing at Oregon this year is going to be selective. The guys they get, by and large, are probably going to be guys that have, more of the better. I don't really buy into portal rankings. Like, okay, I mean, it's somewhat subjective. Like you're going to put a guy here, like portal rankings are really difficult to me.
Sure.
For me, it's about, okay, which schools was this guy considering? Because if his schools are Oregon and Georgia and Ohio State and Texas, and you beat him out, that's clearly a really high-ranked guy, somebody that everybody wants. And I even relate that to prep recruiting as well, but more so with portal targets. So I think we'll see Oregon taking a lot of the guys that a lot of teams want. If you're looking for specifics, which we've talked about already, you need a tight end, right? We know Oregon's going to need at least 1 tight end. You need offensive tackles, I would say 2 probably, but at least 1 for sure. Potentially an interior guy if you're not totally sure there. Maybe yes, maybe no. Defensive line, I think you're going to see, I mean, obviously Bear Alexander's on the board, but I think you see Oregon look at maybe an interior and an edge guy. And then safety. Like we're looking at safety right now. I don't know if you do need a corner or not. It's a maybe. Probably depends on who jumps in, but you definitely need at least one safety. Probably need two for Oregon. And again, these are all just going to kind of supplement. I think I wrote an article that's, for me, I said, I think around 10. I think the number's around 10 transfer portal guys. Maybe it's 8, maybe it's 12. The number's around 10. That's what I think Oregon will probably end up doing.
So we'll see how that number shakes out. But I remember last offseason, I was not expecting Oregon to go in the portal as heavily as they did, and look what happened. But yeah, that's kind of just our feel for it right now, or your feel, like you mentioned in the story that you wrote, that people can go see and read over at ScoopDuck.com. No better time to come try us out with the transfer portal absolutely popping. Justin, one more guy we got to talk about on today's episode is Oregon's newest offer in the transfer portal, which was sent out to Texas State offensive lineman Alex Harkey, listed at 6'6", 305 pounds, originally out of Austin, Texas. He is getting some pretty nice offers as he navigates his transfer portal recruitment. You just finished talking about how the Ducks need some tackle help. So I guess the next step for Oregon here would be trying to get this guy out on campus for a visit. And we also were talking before the show started that we haven't necessarily seen Oregon extend a lot of offers, and sometimes it's not even out there. You don't even know about these guys until they get onto campus. So we got to latch on to whatever we can find as strongly as we can.
Yeah, I know everybody's wanting, all the names and stuff, and I don't blame Oregon, especially in the transfer portal, for keeping things close to the vest, because, if Oregon offers these guys, it's going to draw attention to them, and then it's just going to make it harder to sign them, or more expensive to sign them, however you want to label that. So, for example, we're talking about Bear Alexander. He's never reported an offer from Oregon since entering the transfer portal. Obviously, we know he's offered because he's going to probably visit here in the next week or two. Harkey's reporting his offers, totally his choice, of course. If I recall correctly, like Cincinnati, Illinois, Texas Tech, Cal are some of the ones that he's reported already. I think that's most of them, if not all of them. So not a guy that's blown up just yet, but I think when you're looking at Oregon and you're taking tackles are expensive. Let me start there. Offensive tackles are expensive in the transfer portal. So, and what I mean by expensive is they demand some resources because the supply does not meet the demand, and therefore these offensive tackles that are worthy, command a decent NIL offer. I think in the case of Harkey, you look at him and you think, well, we can maybe get this guy for somewhat of a value, quote unquote value, and this looks like a guy that could be an immediate plug and play at one of the tackle spots. We know Oregon is looking into as well Nevada's left tackle, Isaiah World. Oregon has been linked there. Another offensive tackle that the Ducks we haven't heard of a visit. We've heard of a potential visit, but that's where we're at right now. That's a guy that's probably going to command some more resources, right? That's a guy that's, kind of blown up a little bit, being highly regarded. So, if you're able to maybe find a value tackle and you go and you get a really good tackle like Isaiah World, that could be a really good solution for Oregon. And you can continue to develop the tackles you have. So, yeah, there's a photo of Isaiah World. Love the name because it's fitting, because this kid's like 6'8", 310 pounds. So he's like as big as the world. And quick note, okay, where's this guy? We can see it. Where's this kid's high school?
Lincoln, San Diego.
Lincoln High School, San Diego. We know that school. We know that name. Been good to Oregon in the past. So got to think there's a little bit of an in there for the Ducks as well. So I pay attention. If we're looking at tackle right now, obviously we're looking at Alex and we're looking at Isaiah World. And those are the two that we know about. But I'm certain Oregon's got some others on the hook as well.
Sure. And we'll make sure to track all of those names over at ScoopDuck.com, which is why you got to check us out if you haven't already. And there was one more thing I wanted to say, but I completely lost it. So I'm just going to keep tiptoeing my way around here. But Oregon's going to do some special things in the transfer portal that they always do. That's kind of the way things have gone. But I think that'll do it for us on today's episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. You want to find more of Justin, you can follow him on Twitter/X at JHopkinsSD. Find me anywhere at Torres Sports. Subscribe to the Scoop Duck on 3 YouTube channel and share the Ducks Dish podcast with everyone you know any way that you can. We greatly appreciate the support, and we'll catch you guys in the next episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.